On that frigid Atlanta morning, the sun was still struggling to break through the clouds when the school bus appeared on the narrow street, shattering the silence with its metallic rumble. Children ran excitedly, carrying backpacks that swung in sync with their laughter. It was an ordinary day in an ordinary neighborhood, where everything seemed to follow its usual routine. But amidst all this normalcy, one figure stood out from the crowd. Jordan, a 10-year-old black boy, didn't move. He stood, still on the sidewalk, as if his feet were rooted to the spot. His eyes fixed on the bus betrayed not curiosity, but quiet fear. As his classmates jostled for the best seat, Jordan seemed increasingly dwarfed by the scene. His new backpack, a thoughtful gift from his grandmother, weighed heavily as if it held secrets. The driver, impatient, leaned out the window and tried to make her voice firm. "Hurry up, kid! We don't have all day." But Jordan didn't respond. He simply clutched his backpack to his chest and in a low, almost inaudible voice murmured, "I'm not going in there." The effect was immediate. The children's laughter ceased, the street noise faded, and even the nearby adults stopped to watch. There was no rebellion in his gaze, only a strange conviction. He seemed to know something no one else could see. And in that moment, the silence became heavier than the roar of the engine. What could make a 10-year-old boy refuse to get on a simple school bus? Was Jordan just scared? Or did he see something that would change everyone's lives forever? Subscribe to the channel and like it to see more exciting stories that will keep you hooked from beginning to end. Atlanta was a city that blended the hustle and bustle of the highways with the calm of residential neighborhoods, and it was in one of these neighborhoods that Jordan's small elementary school was located. The reddish brick building had a simple facade, a well-kept lawn, and an American flag fluttering in the wind. Right at the entrance, to outsiders, it was just another ordinary school where children learned math, English, and science, while adults repeated the same old story that everything was business as usual. But behind the whitewashed walls, the atmosphere wasn't always as innocent as it seemed. Teachers hurried through the hallways, preoccupied with reports and grades, rarely paying attention to the children's signals. The principal, a stern woman with thick glasses named Mrs. Thompson, believed any unusual behavior was nothing more than a prank or an overactive imagination. To her, Jordan was simply a shy boy who needed discipline and perhaps a few firm conversations to adjust. The bus driver, for her part, grumbled whenever she saw him standing on the sidewalk, convinced he was just trying to attract attention. Among the parents, the topic began to circulate in whispers. Some said the boy was afraid of the noisy engine. Others thought it was a hidden trauma, perhaps linked to some bad experience. His mother, Angela, worked long hours at a local hospital and could explain little beyond the fact that Jordan never, ever refused to go to school, except when the bus was involved. For her, her son's fixed gaze toward that vehicle wasn't simply a childish fear, but a refusal that hid something deeper. His classmates became accustomed to seeing him arrive late, often accompanied by his mother or grandmother. The children mocked, laughed, and coined cruel nicknames. But Jordan remained silent, as if carrying a burden none of them could comprehend. There were nights when his grandmother, a woman of faith who raised him lovingly, would find him awake, drawing strange images in his notebook, brown suitcases, long benches, and sometimes symbols that seemed to make no sense. To her, they were just scribbles, but Jordan drew with the seriousness of someone wanting to leave a clue, as if trying to warn about something she couldn't express in words. In that community, no one took such behavior seriously. It was easier to believe it was a phase, a whim, or even just a figment of one's imagination. However, Jordan's eyes, always watchful and suspicious when the subject was the school bus, belied any simple explanation. And though the adults insisted on dismissing his signs as mere childish tantrums, each refusal grew more intense. Each glance toward the back of the bus seemed more charged. and each drawing hid more than any teacher dared interpret. What no one knew was that soon this ignored silence would give way to signs so clear that it would be impossible to continue pretending nothing was happening. The following days revealed that Jordan's refusal wasn't an isolated incident, but a pattern that repeated itself with the same intensity. Whenever the school bus stopped in front of his house, he remained motionless, his arms crossed over his backpack and his eyes fixed on the vehicle as if facing something threatening. No matter the weather, whether it was pouring rain or the sun blazing the asphalt, the boy never took a single step toward the open door. Some neighbors, already accustomed to the scene, began to whisper when they saw him standing motionless, as if he were harboring a secret no one dared ask. The driver, a husky-voiced man named Mr. Collins, huffed irritably every morning, repeating phrases like, "He'll have to grow up someday," or "There's nothing to be afraid of." But Jordan just shook his head silently, refusing to comply. Inside the house, the boy's behavior also began to change. He would spend hours in his room, repeatedly drawing brown suitcases with straight lines and almost obsessive details. He didn't draw trees, animals, or storybook characters, but just suitcases, always in the same shape, always placed under benches, as if he were trying to record something he'd seen or sensed. When asked why, Jordan would simply look down and murmur, "They're there." In class, he also stood out for his unusual gestures. While his classmates were distracted, Jordan would discreetly point to the back of the room or scribble symbols in his notebooks, repetitions that seemed inexplicable. The teacher even showed the drawings to the principal, but both concluded they were nothing more than childish fantasy. His grandmother, however, as she leafed through those pages covered in shadowy suitcases and faceless chairs, felt a chill she couldn't explain. His classmates began to mock him even more. They called him the crazy guy with the suitcase and imitated him, laughing when he moved away from the bus benches during recess, as if even the wooden seats were threatening to him. But Jordan didn't react. He never cried in the face of provocation, never responded with words. His resistance was silent but firm, and precisely this silence unsettled those who really stopped to observe him. In that repetitive routine, something began to catch his attention. Jordan always stopped at the same bus stop, the last bench, on the right, his eyes fixed there as if he knew with absolute certainty that something was hidden. Some days, he would stare at that space for so long that he would be late for his first class. It didn't seem to be fear of the noise or the crowd, but of something much more specific, something no one else noticed. And as the weeks passed, his refusal became more dramatic. If anyone tried to pull him onto the bus, he would cling to the handrail of the house's gate and scream at the top of his lungs, as if it were a matter of life or death. With each passing day, his insistence on avoiding that seat grew, transforming what once seemed like mere stubbornness into a mystery increasingly impossible to ignore. The problem was that the adults remained blind, dismissing it all as childish exaggeration. However, strange signs were about to emerge, signs that would give Jordan's fear an undeniable force. The mornings, previously marked only by Jordan's silent refusal, began to take on details that made the atmosphere heavier. Children sitting in the back of the bus commented in nervous whispers about strange sounds coming from under their seats. Some said they heard metallic knocks, as if something were vibrating in the hidden compartment beneath the floor. Others spoke of a low hum, similar to the sound of a chain dragging, that disappeared whenever the driver stopped the bus. One day, a girl named Emily complained that she'd smelled a strong odor of gasoline as soon as she took the last seat. The driver, tired of the children's stories, rolled down the windows and said it was just the engine. But Jordan, who was watching from outside, remained standing, staring at the girl, as if he knew she was about to discover more than she should. In the following weeks, small incidents heightened the air of mystery. One student reported seeing a shadow when he bent down to pick up a pencil that had fallen into the bus aisle. Another said he found sharp marks on the iron seat, as if someone had tried to leave a hidden message. The laughter that used to fill the bus diminished, replaced by suspicious glances and hushed whispers. The situation began to bother even the teachers. Some children returned home upset, saying they didn't want to ride that bus anymore, but their parents insisted it was just a collective imagination. The principal, firm in her stance, decreed that nothing would be investigated until proof was provided. However, Angela, Jordan's mother, began to realize that her son's stories weren't so far removed from what the other children were describing. What had previously seemed like isolated stubbornness now became a silent warning that no one wanted to acknowledge. Meanwhile, Jordan's symptoms intensified. He stayed awake most of the night, and his grandmother would find him drawing once again the same bus bench. But this time, the drawing was accompanied by details, dark lines under the seats, and something resembling a closed box. His fingers trembled and his breathing became shallow, as if simply capturing that image was enough to revive the fear. The adults still tried to convince themselves it was all just their imagination. But the smell, the noises, and the marks under the seats made denial increasingly difficult. Even the driver, who always scoffed at the stories, began to feel uneasy when he noticed the gasoline odor didn't go away after the mechanical checks. He told himself it was just a technical glitch, but deep down, he knew there was something he couldn't explain. With each passing day, the tension grew. It wasn't just Jordan refusing to get on the bus anymore. Now, the entire community was beginning to sense something was happening that wasn't part of a normal school routine. And just as everyone decided to ignore the signs, the first attempt at an investigation would happen. But not in the way they expected. When rumors began to spread through the school hallways, Principal Mrs. Thompson decided she needed to respond to calm parents and students. She summoned the janitor, Mr. Harris, a middle-aged man who always carried a set of keys and a sarcastic wit. He laughed at every story, convinced it was just the children's overactive imaginations. One Thursday morning, while the bus was parked in the courtyard, he entered the vehicle under the watchful eyes of some students peering through the windows. With heavy steps and an air of impatience, he began tapping his foot on the floor, lifting benches, and quickly shining his flashlight under chairs. He muttered aloud that there was nothing there, just accumulated dust, stuck-on chewing gum, and the distinct smell of grease. Jordan, who had been watching the scene from a distance, couldn't take his eyes off the janitor. His lips trembled, and his clenched hands seemed to carry an invisible force, as if silently begging the man to search more carefully. But Mr. Harris, satisfied with his cursory inspection, shrugged and declared before everyone, "There's nothing here. This kid just needs courage." His words were met with relief by some, but not all. A group of children who usually sat at the back of the bus exchanged uneasy glances, as if certain something had been overlooked. The driver, on the other hand, laughed again and said she was tired of wasting time on nonsense. That same afternoon, Jordan came home more dejected than usual. He sat at his desk and silently sketched the same back seat, but this time he added bolder lines, almost tearing the paper, as if shouting through the graphite that there was something beyond the dust. When his grandmother asked why, he simply replied quietly, he didn't see it, because he didn't want to look. The refusal to believe, rather than solving the mystery, only heightened the feeling that something dark remained hidden. The janitor had done his part, but his neglect left a suspicion in the air that spread like a whisper through the hallways. Jordan, however, seemed to know that this first failed attempt would not be the end, and it wouldn't be long before something happened that forced even the most skeptical to face the truth that was about to come to light. The following week seemed to follow the same routine. The bus pulled up. The kids hurried onto the bus. Jordan stood motionless on the sidewalk. But that Monday morning, something broke the cycle. Entering the classroom, the boy walked up to the blackboard before the teacher could even introduce herself. With trembling hands, he picked up a piece of white chalk and, in absolute silence, began to write. His classmates laughed at first, thinking he'd draw those suitcases that so obsessed him again. But as the letters took shape, their laughter faded. The sentence, written firmly, echoed louder than any child's voice could sustain. "Look under the bus, before it's too late." The room fell into a heavy silence. The disconcerted teacher tried to quickly erase the words, claiming it was just a bad joke. But Jordan's expression left no room for doubt. His eyes were watery, his body rigid, as if each letter had been forcibly ripped from him. The news spread quickly through the halls. Within hours, even staff members who never paid attention to the stories were commenting on the phrase on the board. The principal, under pressure, could no longer ignore it. She called the local police, fearing the situation would get out of hand if parents found out. When questioned by the officers, Jordan didn't answer. He simply lowered his eyes and shook his head, repeating in a barely audible voice, "You have to see." His calm, firm tone caused an unease that even the most skeptical adults couldn't hide. It was impossible to continue treating this as a mere childish fantasy. For the first time, everyone felt compelled to act. Jordan's silent insistence had become a scream no one could stifle. And so, faced with a mystery that could no longer be ignored, the investigation would finally begin. But what would be found beneath those benches was beyond anyone's imagination. As news of the phrase written on the chalkboard spread throughout the community, the school ceased to be merely a learning space and became the center of an unsettling buzz. Parents began to press, demanding answers, and the presence of the police seemed the only way to quell the tension. The next morning, 2 police cars pulled up in front of the school building. The sound of doors slamming echoed like a signal that something serious was finally being considered. 2 experienced officers, Sergeant Miller and Detective Carter, were assigned to investigate. Both had handled numerous cases involving false threats at schools, but Jordan's unblinking gaze disarmed them. There was no bravado, no attempt to attract attention. There was only an unsettling silence, sustained by a conviction that even adults couldn't maintain for so long. While the detective spoke with teachers and gathered student reports, Sergeant Miller decided to inspect the bus. The scene attracted curious onlookers. Children peered through the classroom windows, parents leaned against the school fence, and even teachers interrupted their classes to discreetly watch. Jordan, however, remained aloof, standing under the shade of a tree, watching everything silently, as if already knowing what was about to happen. Miller climbed the bus steps with firm steps. The metallic creak of the door echoed across the courtyard, sending shivers down the listeners' spines. The nervous driver handed him the keys and swore she'd never seen anything suspicious. The officer walked down the aisle, bending down to look under the seats, shining a flashlight into the corners. He found dirt, crumpled papers, a few loose change, but nothing to justify panic. It was then that Jordan stepped forward. Even without being called, he entered the bus slowly, his head bowed and his hands trembling. Everyone held their breath. He walked to the back, stopped in front of the last seat on the right and pointed. He didn't say a word, just kept his finger extended, fixed on that space. The sergeant hesitated. Part of him believed it would be just another disappointment, but the deathly silence that dominated the room convinced him to take a closer look. He knelt and passed the flashlight under the seat, examining the metal compartment that supported the structure. Something seemed out of place. There was a small, almost imperceptible crack, as if someone had recently tampered with it. "Carter, come look at this," the sergeant called, his deep voice breaking the tension. The detective quickly entered, crouched down beside him, and carefully touched the crack. He sensed it wasn't natural wear and tear. It was a deliberate opening, as if something were hidden. She asked the janitor for a screwdriver, who, still suspicious, handed it over without question. The silence in the courtyard intensified as the two began to force the crack open. The metallic sound reverberated through the air, each crack seeming to announce that something important was about to be revealed. Jordan didn't look away. His eyes were moist but fixed, as if that moment confirmed everything he'd always been trying to say. After a few minutes of effort, a makeshift lid came off. An empty space appeared beneath the bench, large enough to hide something substantial. The detective reached into the compartment, feeling around until she found a hard, uneven surface. Carefully, she pulled out an object wrapped in dark fabric. Anticipation spread like electricity among those present. Carter placed the bundle on the seat, took a deep breath, and began unraveling the fabric. The murmurs of the children and adults grew louder, but everyone fell silent the moment the outline of the object came into view. It was rectangular, heavy, and weathered. It was a suitcase. That simple object, covered in dust and hidden under the seats, seemed to carry an invisible weight that immediately silenced everyone. The driver took a few steps back, pale. The teachers exchanged looks of disbelief. Jordan closed his eyes for a moment, as if he'd finally received the confirmation he'd been waiting for. But the most important question still remained. What was inside that suitcase? The suitcase lay on the bus seat like an inert body, covered in dust and scarred by time. The worn leather showed deep cracks, as if it had been forgotten there for decades. The silence inside the bus was suffocating. Everyone waited with bated breath, as if simply opening the object could alter the fate of every person present. Sergeant Miller, frowning, approached and touched the rough surface of the briefcase. The sound of his fingers scraping against the leather echoed through the silence, intensifying the tension. He studied the rusty latch, hesitated for a few seconds, then took a deep breath before turning the metal lock. The click that followed was sharp, like a gunshot that pierced the air and drew small gasps from the impromptu audience gathered at the bus door. Detective Carter slowly lifted the lid. Morning light filtered through the opening, revealing the hidden contents. Inside were stacks of bills, carefully tied with aged rubber bands. These weren't just a few forgotten bills, but an absurd amount of cash that filled almost the entire interior of the briefcase. The bundles of bills, in varying states of preservation, smelled strongly of old paper mixed with gasoline, as if they had been stored hastily and in precarious conditions. The impact was immediate. Teachers clapped their hands over their mouths in disbelief. Children widened their eyes, unable to fully comprehend what they were seeing, but aware that it was something too large to be hidden there. The driver, Mr. Collins, instinctively recoiled, his face draining of color in a matter of seconds. The detective removed one of the wads of bills and held it up in front of everyone. The sun streamed through the side window, illuminating the numbers on the bills, and in that instant there was no denying it. It was real money. A lot of money. Money that shouldn't have been there. Jordan, standing in the hallway, just watched. He didn't smile, he didn't cry, he didn't react like the other children. His steady, silent gaze seemed to confirm what everyone had been slow to see. The danger wasn't in the roar of the engine or the worn seats, but in the secret hidden beneath them. The sergeant ordered the briefcase carefully removed and sealed as evidence. The movement was quick, but the sense of heaviness that hung in the air remained. Who had put it there? Why on the school bus? And most of all, How had Jordan sensed what the adults insisted on ignoring? As officers carried the suitcase out, a group of students began whispering that this wasn't the first time strange things had happened to the bus. Some recalled nights when the vehicle would remain parked for hours in deserted locations, with the driver disappearing without explanation. Others spoke of tire tracks near abandoned warehouses that no one could explain. To the adults, it sounded like the exaggeration of frightened children. But for Jordan, each account only reinforced the conviction that the briefcase was just the beginning of something much bigger. He remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the empty bench, as if he knew the space held more secrets than the officers were prepared to face. Outside, the community was already buzzing. Local journalists arrived within minutes, cameras trained on the suitcase being loaded into a police car. The entire neighborhood was buzzing, the news spreading like wildfire. Parents rushed to the school, worried about what their children had witnessed. What had previously been just a rumor was now before everyone's eyes. Something dark was infiltrating the seemingly peaceful routine of a simple school bus. And although the briefcase had been removed, no one could have imagined that the real revelation was yet to come, hidden not only among those notes, but in the dangerous connections that the money would bring to light. The briefcase had already been removed from the bus and sealed as evidence, but the sense of threat lingered in the air, as if the object had left an invisible mark on everyone who witnessed its discovery. The schoolyard buzzed with chatter as police officers tried to quell the excitement of parents and curious onlookers who approached in search of answers. For many, it was impossible to understand how so much money had been hidden under the seats of a vehicle used daily by children. At the local police station, the contents were rigorously analyzed. Most of the bills were dirty, some old, others still recent, but they all had something in common. They were marked in reports of crimes that had been occurring in the city in recent weeks. Gas station robberies, small store robberies, and even activities linked to suburban gangs. What lay before the investigators wasn't just lost or forgotten money. It was the direct proceeds of crime, carefully stored in an unlikely hiding place, the school bus. The revelation came as a shock. The first suspicion fell on the driver, Mr. Collins. His previously arrogant demeanor now seemed to hide something darker. During the interrogation, he stammered, denied, and tried to defend himself by claiming he knew nothing. But his sweaty hands and the way he averted his eyes when asked direct questions betrayed an undisguised nervousness. The police, however, knew that such a sum of money could not be transported and stored without someone close to the bus being involved. At school, teachers were incredulous, refusing to believe that a classmate of years could be linked to something so serious. The principal, who had always downplayed Jordan's behavior, now found herself besieged by questions. She herself began to recall small incidents she had ignored. The boy's insistence on not getting into the bus, the strange drawings teachers would sometimes show, the complaints about noises and smells. All of this, which had previously seemed childish, now became proof that the boy had sensed something the adults had failed to see. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. During the forensic examination, investigators discovered that the briefcase wasn't alone. Fuel residue and traces of grease were embedded in the leather, indicating the money had been moved to locations where vehicles were frequently stored. By cross-referencing police records with anonymous tips, an unexpected link emerged. Abandoned warehouses in the city's southernmost reaches, known for hosting gang meetings. Suddenly, the investigation was no longer limited to the bus driver. The discovery suggested an organized network using the school bus as a discrete means of transport to move large sums of money without arousing suspicion. After all, who would suspect a bus full of children traveling daily through the city streets? As the police followed these leads, Jordan remained silent, but his eyes revealed something no one could ignore. It was as if he knew this wouldn't end with the driver's arrest. During a conversation with his mother at home, he said quietly, "He wasn't alone. There are more people." This phrase, simple and enigmatic, echoed like an omen. The following days were marked by arrests, interrogations, and a growing investigation. Newspapers carried the headline, "Crime Money Found on School Bus." The community was in shock, and the children who had once mocked Jordan now looked at him with a mixture of respect and fear. Still, something remained unclear. The briefcase had revealed the financial side of the crime, but it didn't explain how exactly it had gotten there, who was directly responsible for hiding it, and most importantly, why Jordan seemed so deeply connected to that secret. With each passing day, the boy's figure became more mysterious, almost prophetic, as if he were able to see beyond appearances. And it was just when everyone believed the worst had already been discovered that new evidence emerged, bringing to light an even darker network where justice and impunity would face off in a duel with devastating consequences. Mr. Collins's arrest came 2 days after the briefcase was discovered. Police arrived early at his home and led him away in handcuffs before neighbors who watched in disbelief. For years, he had been seen as a simple man, a school bus driver, someone who went about his daily work without attracting attention. But now, in the eyes of the community, his image was marked by the weight of betrayal. How could someone who interacted with children every day hide such a connection to crime? The news spread like wildfire. Local news stations aired images of the parked bus surrounded by yellow tape, while reporters described the discovery of the money as one of the city's biggest scandals. That year, outraged parents demanded explanations from the school, demanding safety and transparency. Teachers, previously skeptical, couldn't hide their shame at having ignored Jordan's signals. At the police station, Mr. Collins remained silent for hours. Until pressed by the evidence, he partially confessed his involvement. He said he had been coerced by a local gang into using the bus as a temporary hiding place for money. In exchange, he received a monthly stipend. He tried to defend himself by saying he didn't know the final destination of the money and that he would never have put the children at risk. But his words didn't convince investigators. Still, the full truth seemed elusive. It was clear he wasn't the only one responsible. The records pointed to a wider network where other names remained hidden. Authorities decided to intensify the investigation, but as is often the case, rumors began to surface that influential figures were trying to hush up the scandal. Some said local politicians had an interest in keeping certain information from the press. Others spoke of corrupt police officers who already knew about the bus's use and remained silent in exchange for a share of the money. While adults debated justice or impunity, Jordan became the center of attention. Children who had previously ridiculed him now looked at him with reverence, as if he had seen something no one else could. Journalists tried to interview him, but his mother refused. To her, her son was neither a hero nor a seer, just a child carrying a burden that shouldn't be his. Even so, Angela couldn't hide her fear. She worried that by exposing such a big secret, Jordan had drawn the gaze of those who didn't want the truth revealed. At school, classes tried to continue, but the atmosphere was no longer the same. The bus was pulled from the route and replaced by another, but whenever he passed the gate, Jordan would look away, as if remembering every detail hidden beneath those benches. Teachers murmured about the case in the hallways, and even the most skeptical began to admit that the boy had somehow been the key to exposing something that might have remained buried for a long time. And while the driver's arrest brought relief to some, the feeling that the truth was still incomplete remained. The briefcase had been found, but who could guarantee that others weren't scattered in equally unlikely places? Who could guarantee that the criminal network would truly be dismantled? It was this doubt that hung over everyone. The fine line between justice and silence, between exposing the guilty and protecting the powerful. And precisely in this climate of uncertainty, Jordan would do something unexpected, a symbolic act that would leave a deep mark on the memory of all who knew him. The days following Mr. Collins's arrest were silent for Jordan. He avoided conversation, didn't respond to persistent questions from teachers or classmates, and simply walked through the halls as if carrying the echo of something others couldn't yet comprehend. But that Friday, something different happened. The bus, now empty and isolated, remained parked in the police station's yard, awaiting a full forensic examination before being permanently removed from service. The sight of the vehicle parked in the afternoon sun drew curious glances from passers-by. To many, it was simply an object marked by scandal. For Jordan, however, it was the stage for everything he had sensed. That day, as he left school with his mother, the boy stopped at the gates and stared at the bus. He stood there for a few seconds, motionless, as if evaluating whether it was finally safe to approach. Angela tried to pull him by the arm, but he remained firm, his dark eyes reflecting something that mixed fear and relief. Without a word, he let go and walked slowly to the bus door. Police officers watched, but didn't stop him. Jordan climbed the steps, the same ones he had refused to take for so long. He walked down the empty hallway, the floor creaking under his small steps. When he reached the bottom, he stopped in front of the bench where the briefcase had been found. He touched the seat with his fingertips and, for the first time, let out a faint smile. It wasn't a smile of victory or vanity, but of liberation, as if he had finally conquered the shadow that haunted him. He sat calmly, looked out the window, and remained silent. It was as if he was saying, without words, that the danger was no longer there. But as he stood up and got off the bus, he dropped a folded drawing on the seat, a suitcase crossed out with a large X. And this simple, almost invisible gesture carried more mystery than any explanation. Jordan's story didn't end with the discovery of the briefcase, nor with Mr. Collins's arrest. What it left was a warning etched in everyone's memory. When a child's eyes see what adults refuse to see, silence can turn into a scream, and that scream echoes far, beyond the walls of a school. Jordan never explained how he knew. He never said whether someone had told him, whether he had seen it with his own eyes, or whether it was simply a hunch impossible to ignore. He remained in the same silence that had accompanied him from the beginning, but that silence now carried respect, fear, and above all the reminder that innocence is not always blind. The bus, which for so long had been just part of everyday life, became a symbol. For some, it represented the corruption and danger hidden beneath the facade of normalcy. For others, it was the image of courage and resilience of a boy who refused to give in to peer pressure. But for Jordan, it was simply proof that fear never comes without cause. He didn't fear the noise of the engine, nor the taunts of his classmates. He feared what was hidden inside, in the narrow, stuffy space where few would dare pay attention, and where the truth, stifled, seemed to scream in silence. As the days passed, that refusal became a narrative, and the narrative became a collective memory. The entire neighborhood buzzed, trying to decipher what had gone on in the mind of that boy, who, with a simple gesture of denial, exposed secrets many preferred to keep buried. The street, once marked only by the routine sound of the bus, now held a disturbing memory. Every time the bus passed, it wasn't just the children who watched it suspiciously, but also the adults who had finally learned to see beyond the obvious. Jordan never sought to be a hero, and perhaps that's why his actions were so impactful. He didn't stand up to give speeches, point fingers, or make direct accusations. He simply refused to enter. And in this simple act, he showed the world that resistance, when truly charged, can bring down even the oldest secrets. His voice may have remained silent, but his eyes spoke for him. And perhaps this is precisely the most disturbing lesson. He wasn't afraid of the bus. He was afraid of what was hidden inside. A sentence that is not just a conclusion, but a warning, a silent reminder that often children perceive first what adults refuse to accept. If you've been stuck here and believe stories like this need to be told, don't leave without taking action. Subscribe to the channel now, activate the bell and share this video. Many more stories of mystery, courage and unexpected revelations are to come, and you won't want to miss the next chapter.